Welcome back to the channel, folks. This tactical intellectual channel. We're about to roll out a new series. It's called What's Your Type? So the idea behind the concept is we're going to look at anthropological writings from like the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. And we're going to key in on these different types that anthropologists wrote about, like the Caspian type, Mediterranean type, Nordic type, Proto-Negro, Proto-Australoid, so on and so forth, Mongoloid and all. Disclaimer, I know these things are considered outdated and pseudo-scientific in our times, but there are things that we can draw from an anthropological standpoint, an archaeological standpoint, so on and so forth. So now we're going to see what's the origin of these people, where did they settle to, where did they migrate to, all of that stuff right there. I think I had the other way around. Where did they migrate to and where did they settle to? So that's basically the gist of it all. This presentation will be part one of many, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Now, in this video presentation, we're not going to do a really thorough, deep dive type of presentation. We are just laying the groundwork for everything, and the sources that I will use will be 3 sources, maybe a 4th one, but I haven't decided what the 4th source will be. Now, the 3 sources that I will use is Racial History of Man by Roland Dixon, The Races of Europe by William Z. Ripley, Environment, Race, and Migration by Griffith Taylor. The goal is to uncover the mystery, solve the riddles of the Neolithic peoples, not just in Europe, Asia, Africa, but worldwide. We're looking at the proto, fill in the blanks right there. I have the Proto-Australoid slide up. That's like Proto-Australian. Before we move into the next one, look at what the word proto means. I have the screenshot from Google giving the definition of proto, and it just means original or primitive, first, anterior, relating to a precursor. For those who swear they're going through some Mandela effect, it just means first, foremost, or earliest form of. Now that we have the definitions out of the way, we're going to hit the books right now, and we're going to look at the book Racial History of Man by Roland Dixon. We're going to look at page 47 of chapter 1. Just by following the cursor, you can see the location of these caves that are mentioned on page 47. As you can see, it says 3 skeletons have been discovered, which reveal this earliest known population to have been one of short stature with a low dolichocephalic skull and a broad nose, representing thus, on the basis of the scheme and terminology here, adopted the Proto-Australoid type. I don't want to leave you guys hanging on this subject, but we want to address the whole lingo when it comes to the skull shape. This is page 38 of the book The Races of Europe by William Z. Ripley. It's giving you the visual. Long head, round head, brachycephalic is on the left and it's kind of circular. The dolichocephalic is on the right and it's kind of long when it comes to the skull shape. So when you hear the lingo, round head is talking about brachycephalic. When you hear the long head, pause, it's talking about the dolichocephalic. So there you go. Now going back to page 47, we see that they say that these people are short statured. Their skull size is dolichocephalic. The nose is broad, and the terminology that they use to denote these people or signify these people are Proto-Australoid. Now we're gonna have some visuals here, and I'm showing the 2 women here, or the 2 young ladies, then this family here, then this man right here, this woman there, then the bearded man right there, then this woman here, or an older picture of the Aboriginal woman, then last but not least the Aboriginal man here with the beard, white hair, and you see his hair texture right there. So The hair texture is going to go into a lot of different things, so I'll clarify either on this video or the next video presentation. But that's the visual of the proto-australoid, a visual that I'm going to have to make do with for now. Moving on to the proto-negroid. What? Yeah, proto-negroid. Well, anyway, we have some information here, and we're gonna check out the book, The Racial History of Man by Roland Dixon, and we're just gonna see how they define it, or what the criteria is to determine what a proto-negroid skeleton or person is. Looking at page 15 of the book, The Racial History of Man, we're gonna scroll down a little bit and read just the first part right here. It says, thus, the Negro race is usually characterized as being dolichocephalic, hypsi, which is hypsicephalic or orthocephalic, and platyrrhine. Platyrrhine just means having a broad nose right there. You know, that's how they see us right there. It's problematic, but I'm definitely gonna pick this apart a little bit. Let's move on to page 22 and 23. So page 22, okay, as you see, there's a table right there, but we're not going to look at that just yet. Scroll down to the highlighted portion and it reads, they designate in each case a particular combination of the three selected criteria and nothing more. Thus, the proto-negroid type designates a form of skull which is dolichocephalic, hypsicephalic or hypsicephalic, and platyrrhine, and carries with it no necessary implication whatever that any other features which we may be accustomed to think of as occurring in Negro crania are also present. And the statement that among a given people the proto-negroid type is strongly represented does not imply that they have or had a black skin or woolly hair. So speaking on that last part where they say on 22, where they say the statement that among a given people the proto-negroid type is strongly represented does not imply that they have or had a black skin or woolly hair. Now that is part disclaimer and part recognition. It's part disclaimer because, I mean, they can't just come out and be like, hey, they're black, because the people that's funding these studies for these anthropologists and archaeologists, they didn't want to hear that at that time. So you kind of have to muddy the waters a little bit, and it's part recognition because these proto-negroid or Negroes and proto-australoids or proto-Australians, there's some overlap right there. You know, some of them look similar and some of them have similar features. So that's the best explanation right there, because not all proto-Negroes were dark skinned. They were various shades of brown, and vice versa with the proto-Australians. And then you had those that were dark skinned and had the same features as the proto-Negroes, and then the Negroes had the same features as the Australians. Some had straight hair, some had, I guess, quote unquote, woolly hair. And that's overlap right there. And then later on, I'm going to really cover this, but there was definitely certified overlap between the two groups. But I'm going to use a car analogy, and definitely not being offensive, but this is how people can really grasp what I'm saying here. These proto-australoids and proto-Negroes, think of those as like a base model of a car. That's the base model. So when there's more types of Australians and there's different types of Negroes, quote unquote, that's different than the base model, so to speak. So that's the way I can explain it here so that we can grasp it. So let's go ahead and move forward and check out these different models or types of people. All right, we now move on to the Mediterranean type. And I know some people are thinking, excuse me, because in their mind they picture Italians, Spaniards, Greeks, Sicilians, maybe some French people, maybe the Portuguese, North Africans. You know, that's popular today, but they're thinking from a present day. We're going back before all of that, Paleolithic, Neolithic, even the medieval times. So we're going to check out the source, Environment, Race, and Migration by Griffith Taylor, and get some good info on who these people are. We are on page 162. We're going to scroll to the bottom and read a part of the highlighted portion. The subheading, Entry of Modern Races, reads, in early Neolithic times, we reach a period when the major races of Europe entered that continent. There seems little doubt that these newcomers who formed the major stratum in southern Europe made use of the ancient corridor along the Mediterranean shores. They are perhaps most typically represented in their primitive state by the Somali and Gala people in Ethiopia today. And we may picture similar folk moving throughout most of the lowlands of Europe in early Neolithic times. They constitute the Mediterranean race. Stop there. The Somali and Gala peoples in Ethiopia today. Well, I already know what the Somali people look like, but I had to do a Google search on the Gala people, and Google led me to Oromo people, the Oromo people. So I had to just do some more Google searches and get more information on who they were. Was this like an error on Google's part? Well, nah, I was led to a JSTOR article, and the title of this article is The Gala or Oromo of East Africa. And that was interesting right there. So the Gala are known as the Oromo people today, Oromo people. So this is what they look like when you do your Google image search right there. As you can see, these are what the Mediterranean people look like. And then of course, when you want to look up the Somali people, here's the information on this ethnic group. So you know that they're in East Africa. They're Cushitic, Horn of Africa inhabitants. If you don't know what they look like, here's the Google image search right there. And as you can see, going from right to left. So I had a disclaimer early on where I was saying that this could be considered outdated, and in some instances it depends on how it's presented. It could be pseudo. Now, the skeletal structures in and of itself is not pseudo, but it's when you link intelligence to the size of the skull, that's pseudo. But we're not doing that here. We're linking the skeletal structures or remains of an area to where they are now. All right, so I have to clear that up because that was a terrible explanation. Now, what we're doing and the goal is to, link the skeletal remains found belonging to Paleolithic or Neolithic Europeans from Southern Europe, Central Europe, the UK, the British Isles, to those found in East Africa. There's other fields of study that makes those connections. From an archaeological standpoint, there's definite links there. As you can see from these anthropological sources that I have like 5 books that say the same thing. So that's the goal here. And this is the Mediterranean people. So as you see, this thing is intensely convoluted and really fast. On page 120, as you can see, it's talking about a distinction being made between Negroid peoples from the Hamitic and then the Shemitic folks of the Mediterranean race. But we see what Mediterranean races are. And then when you go to page 121, there's that chart right there. See how many races are in Africa, the continent of Africa? That's crazy. But then on page 122, we have another chart, race parallels in Africa and Australia. And as you can see, it's pretty interesting. But all of these charts in pages 120 through 122, we're going to discuss that in depth in later installments. So look out for that. Now we move on to our next type. What is this? Well, it's the alpine type. Now I know some people are thinking, man, you're losing me now, but hold on. Hey, just keep an open mind. Everything will make more sense shortly when you put everything together. So for starters, we're going to see why they are referred to as the alpine race, and we're going to dig into these sources, starting with the book Environment, Race, and Migration. Page 164 reads, the chief feature of the distribution of the European alpines has given them their name. They constitute a wedge which extends across the alpine regions of Europe, separating the northern Nordics from the southern Mediterranean people. That was nothing too deep. It was pretty much self-explanatory. Their name is derived from their place of occupation. Let's move on and add the second informative puzzle piece. Pages 206 through 209 reads, "We may sum up the races of Asia by saying that they are essentially the same as those already discussed in Europe and Africa. The northern races of Asia are Alpine and Nordic as in Europe. The southern races are Mediterranean, Negro, and Negrito as in Africa. The chief difference is in the belt of Australoids in India, for which there is no living analogy in your Africa. That variety of Alpine known as Paraeo EN is also rather unlike any Western group." Okay, the Negritos, portion B, reads, "Because they were driven here by past climatic changes and migrations, remained here and stagnated here." Page 207 reads, "The most primitive folk in Asia are probably the Gadars of the tip of India, the Samang of Perak, the Menkopis of the Andaman Islands, and the Aeta of Luzon in the Philippines. They are Negrito people whose characteristic features have been described earlier. This Negrito stratum is represented by inliers throughout the southeast littoral of Asia and in the adjacent islands. They are Brakif peoples who seem to be in general surrounded by Doketh tribes, and they do not seem to have any obvious relation to the great Alpine Mongolian aggregates of Asia. Dixon attempts to unite the Brakif Negritos with the early Alpine peoples, whom he calls Paleo-Alpine. They have similar horizontal, paraphrasing this part, he's just saying that they have similar, a similar head shape and, the hair, skin color, stature, shape of the nose, and zonal and strata distribution. They're far apart. So we're moving on to page 208, and it reads, "The foregoing table based on Jufrida Ruggieri gives the anthropometric data of these Negritos and other primitive Asiatic Negroids. Hint, hint. As we shall see, there is a submerged stratum of Negrito peoples allied to the above, certainly in southeastern and possibly throughout southern Asia. Example, in Persia and Arabia and possibly in Japan." Moving on to 209. Highlighted portion reads, "The most primitive peoples are the Menkopis of the Andamans already mentioned. Recent ethnic surveys have revealed the survival of a group of dwarf folk in the rugged hills in the extreme south of India. These Kadar people are akin to the Menkopi or Mankopi. Next comes the Vedas, just where one would expect them, in the tropical jungles of the island of Ceylon." Okay, drop down a little bit. "They are fairly closely allied to the Australian Aborigines. Ruggieri mentions 4 skulls from the vicinity of Madras with a..." Okay, so he's basically saying that they are prognathous. Okay, so the skulls are of considerable interest in connection with the affinities of the lower Melanesian Negro with the African Negro, for not many links are known in the wide extent separating the two groups. So then pre-Dravidians, Australoids, or Australians. Now, life is being breathed into this subject. We're starting to show the profile of these people who inhabited the geographical area of the I guess, the alpine land mass or land area through Europe, and it extends into Asia too. So let's go ahead and move forward. So we have a diagram on page 88, figure 36, and it reads: the Negrito and Australoid zones in the Australasian region. The main corridor leading to Australia is shown by the heavy black line. The Negrito localities are enclosed in a broken line. The 6 great parallel rivers of East Tibet are indicated. And as you can see, it's going from India, then all throughout the Pacific to Australia right there. So let's backtrack. Let's go to page 98. So, status of the Australians. And it reads: one of the difficult problems of ethnology is to discover the relative positions of the Australians and Negroes in the ethnological scale. It seems to me that the geographic evidence is helpful here. We assume that the lower Melanesian is comparable with the lower African Negro. So drop down. If we now follow the migrations back, figure 36, to Asia, we find that the bulk of the Dravidian folk of India, who are certainly nearer the Indo-European than are the Negroes, form the stratum which next overlies the Beta Australian type. We do not find any Negroid people in Asia or Indonesia except the Sakai and Semang of Perak, until we reach the Papuan region in the island of Flores. It seems clear, therefore, that the Papuan Negroes were largely confined to the Indonesian islands long before the Australoids left the mainland, and indeed, it is possible that many Negritos were present in Asia long before the Papuans had left. Putting it the other way, if the Papuan were a later migration than the Australian, we should expect to find inliers of Papuans in South India and the Australians entirely pushed to the wall, whereas the contrary is the case. So basically, what was even the point of mentioning this contrary hypothetical when it wasn't true? Now, another thing that's kind of a pet peeve of mine and really trips up a lot of people when it comes to this academic subject right here is when they differentiate between Australian and Negrito and Negroid and everything. All those people are the same. They're Negroids right there. How can I say that? Well, I have proof backing me up, and that takes us to pages 133 and 134. Let's see what that says. Pages 133 and 134, starting at page 133, highlighted portion, reads: apart from the hair, there is no very striking difference between the Australoids and Negroes, but hair texture is universally admitted to be of great importance, and in the Australoids, it is almost universally wavy rather than curly and never frizzy. This places them biologically nearer the central racial zones, Mediterranean and Alpine. It is of interest that Saracen records that the newborn New Caledonian Negro has wavy hair, which is replaced after the first week or so by the usual kinky Negro hair. So that kinky hair is possibly a secondary character acquired by Negro peoples. If we turn to the ecological evidence, then it seems clear that the Australoids migrated out of Asia much later than did the Negroes. 134 reads: thus, Mitra writes, India shares with the African Proto-Negroid beginnings, and with Southeast Asia, the superimposition on them of Proto-Australoid elements. There are now no Negroes or Negritos on the mainland except in Perak, and perhaps in the tip of India, but there are millions of Australoids, the so-called pre-Dravidian tribes, in the eastern hills of the Deccan in India and in Ceylon, so that we may surely say that their less marginal position agrees with the hair character and places the wavy Australoids a little higher than the frizzy Negroes of Africa or Oceania. So what is all of this saying right here? Well, in page 133, they're basically saying, hey man, we can't really tell the Australian from a Negro. The only difference is the hair texture, and that may play a part, because when you look at 134, you see it tells you that India shares with Africa the proto-Negroid beginning. Now that proto-Negro thing, that's just their term for the general black person as they see it. We know that the melanated person, the original person, is much more diverse than what they think, hence how they can categorize the East Africans as Mediterraneans. And then we're finding out right now that these Alpines, well, at the end of the video, you're going to see who's who. But basically on page 134, it's telling you who is who and who was where. Okay. All right. So another, like I said, all these three groups right here, or four groups, the Proto-Australoids, the Negroes, the Papuans, the Proto-Australoids, they're all melanated people. Various features like hair texture, what they say, nasal cavity or whatever, that's just nose shape. But a lot of these people just migrated, mixed, and it's various degrees of intermixture. Some people, this group may have more Proto-Negro or Mediterranean. I mean, the Proto-Negroes and the Mediterraneans and Australians, they're all Negroes. It's just different features, different heights, all of that stuff. So let's proceed. All right, now it's time for that visual. We're going to go back to page 122 and check out that race parallels in Africa and Australia. Now go all the way down to islands farther to the east, and then it's telling you the race, that column right there, early alpine types. Then when you look at Africa and then Australia, the Merina of Madagascar. We're gonna key in on these folks and just show you what they look like. You can refer to them as the Merina or Merina people today, and we're gonna check out this video here, a portion of it, on the Malagasy people of the Pacific Island area. So keep in mind that these people did migrate here from India and Asia. But here you go, here's the visual.
More than 9/10 of the population is Malagasy, which is divided into about 20 ethnic groups. The largest and most dominant of the groups is the Merina people, who are scattered throughout the island. The name Merina and Merina is said to mean elevated people, deriving from the fact that they lived on the plateau. The second largest group is the Betsimisaraka, the inseparable multitude who live generally in the east. The third most numerous group is the Betsileo, the invincible multitude, who inhabit the plateau around Fianarantsoa. Other important peoples are the Tsimihety, those who do not cut their hair, the Sakalava, people of the Long Valley, the Antandroi, people of the thorn bush, the Tanala, people of the forest, the Anti-Moro, people of the banks, and the Bara, a name of uncertain origin. Language. Although Madagascar is located geographically close to Bantu-speaking Africa, Malagasy is a standardized version of Merina, an Austronesian language. It shares a high degree of mutual intelligibility with the Malay language of Indonesia.
Again, that's just a visualization so you guys can have a good idea, a well-informed idea on what these early alpine people looked like. Now, that film that you, or video that you saw, that's from Afro Artista Films, and the link will be in the description. And here's some more visualization for you. So yes, I am biased. I follow the information, the sensible and logical information. And I do realize that there were other alpine types, but that's the point of having subsequent videos and a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4. You know, these very melanated Negrito looking types of alpine people, these are the originals. So of course I'm gonna put them as the stock version of that, and then we're gonna show the variations in later videos and presentations. Now, speaking of that, we're gonna head on to our next point to support what I just showed you guys. Page 216, the highlighted portion reads, "The race zones of China show Negritos surviving in the Philippine Islands. Sometimes Negroes are doubtfully reported from this area also. There are many relics of a Nesiote Mediterranean zone, but the dominant race is the Parayo-en, the rather small, slight alpine type with marked cheekbones and a flattish nose, to which the Malays and peoples of South China and much of Japan belong." Now, a while back, I did the Makeup of East Asia parts 1 and 2, and these basically corroborate one another. Everything that's being shown on page 216 in the highlighted portion, that was what was brought out in those Makeup of East Asia video presentations there. So as you can see, you have the Negrito presence in the Philippines, and then it mentions that Negroes are doubtfully reported from this area, but you have the relics and I guess skeletal remains of the Nesiote, that's that zone of Mediterranean types. Then they say that the dominant race are the rather small, slight alpine type people, and the features are the prominent or marked, as they use that word, cheekbones, and the nose is flat. And then they basically say that the Malays and peoples of South China and much of Japan belong to that alpine type, no different than the Malays that you saw in the Makeup of East Asia videos part 1 and 2. So now onward, we move to our next point. 217 and 218, the highlighted portion reads, "The main influx of this taller alpine or Manchu type was probably between 1000 and 500 BC. Though Bishop makes their entry some 500 years later. Monroe inclines to the belief that much of their culture, like that of the Chinese, came ultimately from Sumeria or Acadia or thereabouts. The other great invasions seems to have come from the south and consisted of shorter Parayo-en races akin to the Malays. Monroe refers to them as Kumaso." 218. Monroe suggests, however, that there was probably a Negrito stock in South Japan in the early days, from whom some of the Kumaso folk may have been derived by race mixture with higher types. Monroe concludes that the Japanese are not a race, but a loose mixture of variously assorted racial features. Okay, drop down a little bit. Matsumura's recent work on head shape and stature in Japan shows that relatively tall, broad-headed folk alpine, occupy the north center and west of Hondo. The long heads, Caspian or Mediterranean, lives around the inland sea and on the actual west and northeast coasts of Hondo. The short, broad heads with some Negro blood, another question mark, live in small groups in the extreme south of Kyushu and in the extreme south and west of Hondo. So we're nearing the end of this video presentation, and it's time for me to cook a little bit because I was a little too formal in presenting the information. But I'm still going to present some information, but I'm going to do it in my way, to brag a little bit. So here we go. So now we peer into the book, The Races of Europe by William Z. Ripley, pages 125 and 126. The highlighted portion reads, a new phase of the matter was presented by Broca's celebrated researchers concerning the physical characteristics of the French people in the decade following 1860, especially those among the peasants in Brittany. Here were the only Celtic-speaking people on the continent, and they were of a brunette and short race. Then, in 1865, came the monumental work of Davis and Thurnham, the Crania Britannica, with added proof that a large part of the Celtic-speaking populations of the British Isles, particularly the Welsh, were equally short and of dark complexion. Broca and Bedeau, among anthropologists, at once grasped the situation. They perceived the inconvenience attendant upon the use of the term. Nevertheless, the advocates of the old view of tall, blonde Celts still counted eminent authority among their number, such as Van Beyer with his and Rotmeyer, proof of a widespread short and dark population through Central Europe, even in southern Germany. Meanwhile, accumulated rapidly at the hands of Ecker, von Holder, Welker, and others. They, however, dodged the issue by applying new names to this broad-headed autochthonic population, which they discovered in the recesses of the Black Forest and the Alps. These people they called Ligurian, Sarmatian, Slavic, or Scion types. 126 reads, whatever be the present state of opinion among students of other cognate sciences, there is practically today a complete unanimity of opinion among physical anthropologists that the term Celt, if used at all, belongs to the second of our three races, the brachycephalic darkish population of the Alpine highlands. Such is the view of Broca, Bertrand, Topinard, Collignon, and all the French authorities. It is accepted by the Germans, Virchow, Coleman, and Rank, as well as by the English, foremost among them Dr. Bedeau, and by the most competent Italians. The conclusion you should be coming to was that, like back then, they knew that there was a dark complexioned population or populations of Europe, and that was the Alpine type, the Mediterranean, Proto-Australians, and Proto quote-unquote Negroes. So let's check out another token of confirmation and see what it says. Page 466, the highlighted portion reads, we are strengthened in this assumption that the earliest Europeans were not only long-headed but also dark-complexioned by various points in our inquiry thus far. Drop down. And comparing types in the British Isles, we saw that everything tended to show that the brunette populations of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland constituted the most primitive stratum of population in Britain. Furthermore, in that curious spot in Garfagnana, where a survival of the ancient Ligurian population of northern Italy is indicated, there also are the people characteristically dark. Judged, therefore, either in the height or the light of general principles or of local details, it would seem as if this earliest race in Europe must have been very dark. It was Mediterranean in its pigmental affinities and not Scandinavian. So basically, the term brunette is referring to complexion. Dark is referring to complexion. Darkish is referring to complexion. So then that last sentence, when they say it's not Scandinavian, they're talking about what you typically think of when you hear the word Scandinavian. The complexion, the pale complexion. So we're back in the book, Environment, Race, and Migration by Griffith Taylor. we're gonna start on 106 and conclude with page 107, and we're just gonna cover the important main points of this topic. All right, first paragraph, the highlighted portion reads: a second migration consisted mainly, we may imagine, of Nesiote types akin to Mediterranean, whom Dixon calls Caspian types. All right, that's enough of that. Now let's go to 107, and it reads: as regards these outer Polynesian islands, Dixon points out that Hawaii was first settled by folk akin to those of Indochina, and then by pure alpine peoples of a later evolved type. Easter Island has a first layer of Proto-Negroid akin to the similar Melanesians, followed by his Caspian type akin to many Japanese. New Zealand has this later stratum in the north, with many latter alpines in the south, similar to those filling the central Polynesian islands today. Now, all of that from the Caspian type was just to get your appetite wet a little bit, because part 2, I'm going to go further in depth on, Alpine, Mediterranean, Caspian, and then the various spin-offs from those groups of people there. Now, basically, it's safe to say that Mediterranean, Caspian, Alpine, they're all similar. It's based on geography more, but there's some different higher frequencies or lower frequencies of the Negro or the Australian types, and even those, the Negro types and the Australian types, there's spin-offs and different variations of those type of people there. So, here's a picture or image of the Nesiote type people, and as you can see, Negro. All right, man, this was some strong information. We're concluding this video, but for those people that's monitoring this information from myself and other content creators who do similar work on displaying and talking about the original peoples, man, I feel like Jay Mills in that battle when he was going against Murder Mook.
Ready? Serious? Are you serious? Hold on. Are they serious? Are they serious?
So, to put it simply, this video presentation here is very important to this platform, because we're going to the very beginnings of everything, of these different human populations in various parts of the world. These spin-offs, these other variants that came later, that's these other folks, because Mediterranean, Australoid, Negro, Alpine, Caspian, they were all over. That's why I refer to these folks as the original people. Melanated folks, different cultures nonetheless. That was the only difference. Yeah, I feel good about this one. All right, that's the end of this video. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you guys later.